Good afternoon and a huge welcome to BlocksUp. My name is Pernille Berg. I'm Science Director here at BlocksUp. Apologies a little bit for those of you who've been waiting for a few seconds. I was staring beautifully into the autumn weather here in Copenhagen, so apologies. And today I'm extremely happy to welcome Saskia von der Muijsenberg, and I hope I've now pronounced it correctly, Saskia. We're in the series of Regenerate and Regenerate Now. And this is one of our last science talks of the year. We have a session on the 29th of November. But today I have more or less looked forward to from the very beginning of this series. So I'm opening today on a slightly different note. When we started developing this series, I spoke to a lot of people about regenerative design, regenerative culture, and why I thought that this was urgently needed to disseminate, share, discuss, explicate, and really reach out to international formidable speakers, scientists, practitioners, who could share their experiences and insights on the regenerative paradigm and what it means. And as a lot of people have experienced before me, when we start expressing new sentiments, new concepts, new words, new paradigms, some people respond by saying, nah, I don't think so. Other by saying, but why? Some by laughing, and some by saying, I've never heard of this before, it sounds so interesting, tell me more. And throughout the year, the latter has definitely outgrown some of the former. And so it is, because when I started searching, researching, diving deep into this subject with my wonderful colleagues and the people that I met throughout this journey and exploration, what became very clear to me is that not only is there a sense of urgency in sharing, but there's also a sense of urgency in caring, and caring for the planetary boundaries and caring for each other. There are so many questions that we're asking today. We're asking, are we building in the right way? Are our cities designed in the right way? The continuum rural-urban, are we making dichotomies that are unnecessary? What will our food production look like in the future? How will we ensure peace in the future? And this year, for sure, as the few years before us have shown, these questions must be asked, and most importantly, we can't answer them alone. So for those of you who are with us for the very first time, this is a different introduction to the one that I normally do. But because I have been reading about Saskia, I thought that this was a person with whom I could share these thoughts. Saskia is one of the co-founders of Biomimicry Institute in the Netherlands. And a decade ago, I met one of Saskia's colleagues from California, Beth Ratner, and we talked about what Saskia will now really dive deeply into, namely biomimicry. And why is biomimicry associated and part of the regenerative? Saskia will undoubtedly make very clear to us. BlocksUp is about 5 years old, and what we do in BlocksUp as a community, both virtually and physically, is striving to ensure sustainable urbanization with the staunch awareness that we can't do it alone. So we believe in interaction. We also believe in consilience. Consilience meaning cross-disciplinary professions and cross-disciplinary perspectives in sharing how we are to face the future ahead, the present, and how we bring the past with us in the best possible way. We're research institutions, organizations, startups, companies, Danish, Nordic, international, and global. So we're very, very happy that you're with us today for those of you who've not joined us before, and we sincerely hope we'll see you again. And Saskia, you also share your knowledge, not just with the likes of us, but also with research institutions, other communities. You assist in strategizing and developing concepts to show just how much biomimicry and the knowledge behind it and the practices behind it can actually aid and assist and generate the future within the regenerative paradigm. So without speaking much more now, I will be quiet. I'll welcome you. I want to say a huge thank you for being with us today. We've really, really looked forward to having you with us, knowing that the knowledge you represent and present is pivotal in order to ensure the sustainable urbanization. So a huge thank you for those of you who are with us. You're welcome to ask questions in the chat if you're with us virtually. And those of you who are with us physically, you will get to ask a question at the end of Saskia's presentation. So thank you again. And I'll leave the rest of the talk to you before I reconvene for questions and answers. But again, thank you and a huge welcome.
Well, thanks a lot, Pernille, and I'm very happy to be with you, although I'm sitting here in this sort of square cubicle and not be able to be with you. I hope we still can sort of transfer thoughts and ideas and connect through, the wonders of internet. So, yeah, today I want to talk about biomimicry, my field of work, my big passion. And for those who don't know what biomimicry is or wonder where this word is coming from, it actually is coming from two Greek words, bios, meaning life, as we know in biology, and mimesis, meaning something like to imitate or copy or emulate. So, but what I really am doing today is hopefully bringing a new perspective, because I think life is all about how we see things and also how we look at nature. And how we look at nature is then also how we look at ourselves. Because I think for a lot of people have sort of forgotten that we are nature too. For lots of people that I talk to, nature is something that is outdoors, that is be humans, and outdoor is nature, but nothing. that's just a sort of the paradox that is so untrue. We are so much connected to all the rest of nature and dependent on it as well. And because we are nature, we are just one of the millions of species out there. But at the same time, we also a very young species. And although we are young, we have a huge impact, which is unfortunate, not always that positive. And this is due to the fact that we still operate in a very linear way, part of a linear economy where we take and make stuff, and in the end, most of it ends up in landfill or in the atmosphere. And this is causing us to have Earth overshoot days coming closer to the 1st of January. And so for those who may not be familiar with Earth Overshoot Day, this is the day. So all the materials and all the waste that our planet can sort of regenerate in a year's time, what it takes to do in a year's time, we have already consumed and polluted and done so much that we're sort of over the boundaries by the 28th of July. And this is for the whole world. I know for the Netherlands, the date is already end of March. I'm not sure what it is for Denmark. It's something you can look up. But all this makes me feel that every time that we are reading in the newspapers, well, maybe not so much at the moment because there's so many crises going on, but every time we read in the news that we're doing well or economy is growing, it makes me feel like help, because it's so much, which economy is growing? Is it the linear one, or is it, if it could be the circular one, then yay, that would be great. But unfortunately, it's mainly the linear one that is still growing and causing more and more trouble. So much for the doom and gloom, but also to showcase the necessity of having a field like biomimicry. Because if we would look in a different way at nature, as maybe the most advanced lab that is out there, one that is making use of 3.8 billion years of R&D, we can see and learn from, other organisms that have learned to be adaptive and thriving on this planet without crossing those planetary boundaries. So in short, a sustainable world already exists and we only need to learn from it. And that is not so difficult in a way, because we have the same needs as all the other organisms that call this planet their home. We also want to stay warm in winter. We also want to live cooperatively in our communities. We also want to optimize our distribution, as our lungs do and as the nerves in the leaves do. They want to transport water, and there is a mathematical way of doing that the best. We also want to protect ourselves from the elements, or we want to desalinate, illuminate. There are species out there that can do this without, using a plug and electricity. How do they do it? We also want to create strong materials at ambient temperature. We also want to harvest energy. And we want to do these things, well, maybe as energy efficient as the other species out there. So for instance, if we compare our technology and the technology of biology, what you see here is the amount of energy that is lost when those really high trees, when they get water all the way up in the crown using capillary action. Whereas if we want to bring water to our high-rise buildings, we need an electro pump on maybe each 5th floor. And it's not a very efficient mode of getting that done. Or let's compare how we make color, how we are dyeing our textiles, and how much dye is being used to make that happen. Whereas some organisms, like this beautiful beetle, but also there's many birds and butterflies out there that are using structural color to create colors. And within making those colors, within the dyeing, this is the number of liters of water disposed of just in the Asian textile industry per day. And if you look at these beautiful parrots and their colors, they don't need this daily dyeing process. The color stays on. And another quite famous example, I think, there is lots of scientists that are now trying to figure out how to mimic the strength of silk of spider webs. Because if you would compare, let's say, a pink of spider silk and a pink of steel, then spider silk is 5 times stronger than that, and it's made from chopped up flies, at ambient temperature, and the spider can eat its own spider web again after it's being used. And look at the difference in the temperature that is needed to make those two materials. So yes, we can learn a lot from nature. So what I did today is I brought also some practical case studies from organizations that have been successful in applying biomimicry. And what is good to know is that you can do biomimicry on different levels. We can look at the forms or shapes in nature. We can look at processes. They can be chemical processes or organizational processes, but we can also learn from entire ecosystems. So first, let's have a look at form, at shape. And with this, I have a short film. And now the clicker doesn't work anymore. You will always see. Let's see. Oh no, I'm sorry. My mistake. I'm doing something wrong. Sorry for that. So one of the shapes that you can find anywhere in nature is this spiral shape. We see it in our own DNA. It's in the sunflower petals. It's also in the way antlers grow, and they all follow the same sort of mathematical pattern called the Fibonacci sequence or the golden ratio. And one of the companies that has been intrigued by the way water flows, because our fluids, they also flow in a spiral shape. You will notice if you unplug your bathtub, is that that this is the most efficient or the quickest way for water to move. And Puck Scientific is a company that was able to freeze a whirlpool, create an impeller. They call it a lily impeller because it is a spiral shape of that lily that you see on the left. And this device that you see there in the middle is now here in front of a huge water tank on a tripod. So the device is as big as your hand. And it's put in the water tank to help the water moving, to prevent Legionella from forming. And if you would look at the traditional device that would go in there, and you already see the difference in how much material was needed then, but also the process, because here this is built with scoops that is pushing out the water. But we found that water wants to flow in this spiral shape. And that is exactly what this impeller is doing. It's creating a vortex, so it's making a whirlpool, and therefore the water can keep bouncing off the walls, and it's only using the same electricity as the 3 light bulbs. So much more material and energy efficient. And I think that that's a good lesson from nature, because all organisms don't, they don't want to spend too much energy on making materials or producing energy. So for the next one, I have a short film, and Saskia, if you could help start it, that would be great.
Biomimicry was used in the design of one of the most iconic structures in the world, the Eiffel Tower. The designers of the famous tower in Paris took inspiration from a natural design principle called structural hierarchy. Take, for example, your femur bone or thigh bone. Your femur bone gets its strength from tiny tubes called osteons, composed of even tinier bundles inside called fibrils. Tubes within tubes within tubes. When Eiffel was looking for lightweight strength for his tower, he applied a similar structural hierarchy of trusses within trusses within trusses to achieve it. The tower's curving support structures also appear in nature. Your femur bone is wide on top and then narrows as it goes down into your leg. When Eiffel was designing his tower in Paris, he looked at how the bone was reinforced along lines of stress. He realized that if he turned that upside down, he could have a very strong base that would handle any kind of winds that might hit the tower. So when you look at those crossbars on the Eiffel Tower, understand that those were inspired by the same lines of reinforcement that are in your bones.
Yeah, so bones, here you see the cross-section of a bird's bone. And of course, birds need to be light, but still the bones need to be, well, provide enough strength. Bones have inspired so many innovations within the biomimicry field, and for one is an algorithm based on those bone structures. And here you see this is like the using this software called OptiStruct was used by Mercedes-Benz to create its concept car, and this here it's used to sort of see where would be the most stresses on the car, and only then it would be 3D printed and make the materials there where it is needed, reducing so much weight of a car. It's also being applied in airplanes at the moment, the same algorithms and the software, where here you see those panels, dividing panels between first class and economy class. Of course, also to make planes more lightweight so they consume less fuel. And perhaps then airplanes could look like this in the future. And also you see the wingtips there. In the Netherlands, there is she's an artist, Lilian van Daal, and she was really intrigued by why plants have like soft material and strong and harder parts, but it's all made from just one material. And she wanted to create furniture that is also much easier to recycle, because most of our couches and chairs, maybe the ones you're sitting on right now, are made from different types of material. If you think a regular couch may have foam and leather, or some nails or glue or wood or metals, and it's really difficult to take that all apart and have that recycled. So she was intrigued by those plant cell structures, because if you think of a flower, the stem is quite hard, whereas the petals of the flower petals are very soft, and the leaves are maybe something in between. So what nature does, it manipulates the structure of the material to create different functionality. If it needs to be breathable, it creates pores in the structure. If it needs to be hard, it's using more like a plywood structure, and so on. So this is a 3D printed chair made from bioplastic, inspired by plant cells. And she is now collaborating together with Volvo to see if they can make car seats for, well, seats for in cars, of course. So pretty cool that it's happening now. Another, I think, maybe already a classic example is the lotus effect. Lotus leaves are living in muddy pools, but they still want to do photosynthesis. So they have a mechanism that if water drops fall on the leaves, they curl up and wash away all the dirt, like what you see on that sheet of paper. And the way that is that if you would look on a microscope at the nano level, there are so many bumps in the lotus leaf. It's not very smooth, it's a bumpy surface, and on the top of the bumps it has a waxy layer that is hydrophobic, but in the grooves the material is hydrophilic, so attracting the water molecules. And so because you have this difference in hydrophobic and hydrophilic, the water will curl up in a ball and then take off all the dirt. And this is now being applied into paint that we can use on our buildings, so they become self-cleaning buildings, for instance. I already talked a bit about color and how nature produces color without pigments. And even if I already said so, these peacock feathers, it's probably hard to imagine that you see all these beautiful colors, but in fact a peacock has just one pigment. A peacock is completely brown. But at the nano level, those feathers have all the different layers that then retract and reflect the light in different length waves, and therefore we see those different colors. So this is what we call structural color. And also the beetle I presented earlier, and many birds and butterflies have that same structural color mechanism. And there are now companies looking at textiles. Can we produce textiles so we don't have to dye them anymore, and no heavy metals end up in our environment? And if we start 3D printing becomes more advanced and we understand the recipe of how to create yellow or how to create blue, how many layers and how much apart do they need to be, I think in the future we can start printing colors on any surface. And we already have in the Netherlands a company that can create color with nano lasers. So using laser on metal shields is by, some they goes a bit deeper than others, is how they can create those different colors. So pretty cool, a real platform technology. And talking about that, platform technologies, because there's many findings in nature that could inform different sectors or different industries. And this is another one of those. If you look here, this little creature on the, well, I hope for you it's also on the left, it's a little water bear or a tardigrade. They have such amazing capabilities. It's a tiny creature. It just is like 2 millimeters. It lives in mosses around the world. And there's some other organisms that can do the same, like the resurrection fern and some single-celled organisms that float in the ocean. And what is so cool about these organisms, they can sort of stop their own metabolism when the times are rough. The tardigrade can shut itself down completely for over 100 years. Scientists have sent the tardigrade all the way up into the moon. They sent him down 3 kilometers down in the ocean, and it's still perfectly alive. They bombarded it with the same radiation as Chernobyl, and it still produces healthy offspring. So how is that possible? It almost sounds like an alien creature here. And how this, well, the way this works and how it has inspired companies for vaccine stabilization is as follows. This tiny organism is capable of dehydrating itself completely by creating a small sugar layer around its vital organs, and that's how it is protected. And it can stay like that in that dormant situation for over 100 years. And as soon as you put one drop of water or liquid with it, it comes alive again. And this is something that set the scientists to think about and try, and together with Nova Laboratories, they now found they are using it for, well, vaccine stabilization. Normally vaccines that are transported all around the world need to be refrigerated. And sometimes, well, something happens and then they have to throw away all the vaccines. Cooling, refrigerating is also very energy consuming. So what they do now is they can dehydrate the vaccine, inject it in our bloodstream, and as soon as it comes in contact with the blood, it comes alive again and it's doing its work. And you can imagine that also other industries like the food industry is very interested in using this mechanism. For my next example, which is also a process example, we're looking at another short film again. So Saskia, if you could start it, that would be wonderful. I hope it's working.
We think of CO2 as the poison of our era because we have such excess of it. But in the natural world, CO2 is a building block. Anything green that you see, from algae to trees, is composed of carbon dioxide. And anything hard in the ocean, like coral reefs or shells, they're made from dissolved CO2. Concrete, which is our largest building material, releases a ton of CO2 for every ton of concrete. 6 to 8% of all CO2 emissions are concrete. With coral reefs, it's the opposite. CO2 is sequestered in the reef. So there's a company called Calera that was started by a coral researcher. And he took the recipe from the coral reef, and now he takes CO2 from smokestacks, bubbles it through seawater to get the minerals, and out precipitates the raw material for cement, which is then used to make concrete. If we began to think of CO2 as a feedstock for our stuff, it might be a way to begin to use some of this excess CO2.
Yeah, so CO2, cement from CO2, New Light Technologies is another really interesting company who is using greenhouse gases to produce bioplastics. They can even make it from methane. And nowadays they already have closed deals with large organizations like IKEA and Nike to make their products from greenhouse emissions. So there's still hope, people. And we can not only look at chemical processes in nature to be informed and inspired, but also at more organizational ones, like studying schools of fish or these flocks of birds, or think about termites that build these huge constructs, they're termite mounds, and inside it's a very ingenious ventilation system that inspired some buildings in Africa, so they don't have to cool or use an air conditioning to cool anymore. But for this one, I wanted to think a bit about how are they doing this? There's not one termite giving direct directions to other termites. There's not one overseeing the others. All these organisms, they use some very simple rules and direct feedback at an individual level. So each one of them knows if I'm adhering to the rule, and as an emergent property, something at the system level, something complex can come about. And that is something we could apply in our organizations as well. Or maybe something like the way geese migrate. You're probably familiar with this V shape, and you may know that the front goose, that they rotate. And for a long time, of course, we knew this was because, well, you get tired because of the headwind. But we also found that there is not one goose that knows the entire route. So they rotate based on their experience and their skills. And this is something you could translate into project management, for instance, because normally we apply one project manager for the duration of the whole project. But perhaps you need different people with different skills at different times. And then if we move more to system level examples of biomimicry, of course, there is no waste in nature. This fallen tree will give even 5 times longer nutrients to its surrounding than it was when it was alive. So having no waste is, I think, nature can teach us some valuable lessons how to do that. And there are some companies already very active in that field, like Ecovative. They are in the compostable packaging, using mycelium to replace things like styrofoam and stuff like that. But there's also this is also a very cool project, I think, in the UK, where they started collecting waste paper waste from shops and restaurants, which you can see in the continuous loop in the food web there in the middle. Then they would shred that paper waste and sell it for horse bedding. Well, after some time, the horse bedding needs to be replaced, so then it was put on a compost pile. Worms would feed on that and, of course, reproduce. So you would have more worms than when you started. And then the extra worms, they were fed to sturgeon at the same project site. And the sturgeons, they produced caviar. And then the caviar could be sold again to the restaurants. So with some simple loops, you could really upcycle something as simple as cardboard waste. And then over time, some other loops and services entered this whole continuous loop. So that's, I think, also a very good lesson with us. We are doing, well, if companies want to become circular, they find one company that could be, let's say, next in line, and they make a closed loop system. But what we see in nature, it's not really that close. There's always other partners that could come in and add value, and therefore it can become a growing regenerative system. So we're not there yet. Well, some beer breweries are pretty far in applying these circular lessons. This is Wildwood Breweries was one of the first starting to do this. And here you see, let's say, the linear system, the before we go circular, all the inputs in green and all the outputs in red, and how much we need to produce just 1 barrel of beer, how much barley and how much water. So when they started going circular, and this next picture is maybe a bit hard to read, but it's not about going completely into this. It's more about understanding that still you have those inputs on the top. You have the brewery and you have some outputs, but each output can go into something else again. And they can also now address different industries. And this also makes you wonder, should you really invest only in your core business? Or do you have different streams and different core businesses if you start going circular? Well, I think maybe finally, I wanted to take a bit more time to talk about the case of interface, because interface has really been applying biomimicry for over 25 years now, and there's a lot to share. And they take all this and becoming regenerative a step further. So Interface is a company that a stock market-based company. They produce carpet tiles. And in the mid-90s, this was still a completely fossil fuel-based product. Their late CEO, Ray Anderson, was getting some questions from their customers. So what are you doing about sustainability? And he didn't really have a good answer. It was something like, yes, we are compliant. But he felt that it was an important question, and it bothered him that he didn't have a better answer. So he formed a think tank, a group of people, and Janine Benyus, let's say the biomimicry guru, was one of them. In that was also the Cradle to Cradle folks. Michael Braungart was part of it. Paul Hawken from Project Drawdown, and Amory Lovins, and some other people. And they helped Interface to think differently about how to become a regenerative business. So what they first did was translate some more generic principles from nature, some lessons, and translate them to business strategies. Like, well, nature doesn't know waste, so they should eliminate all waste, have only benign emissions, run all their operations on renewable energy, like nature is doing. Try to close the loop as much as possible. They had quite heavy sort of impact with their transportation system, so they wanted to make that much more resource efficient. And they also had to maybe more softer goals, how to sensitize our stakeholders, how to bring them along, and how to redesign their business model. So one of the first things they did was more about product innovation. And with a design team, they went outside into the forest at time like this in fall, and they saw all those beautiful colored leaves, and they realized that a forest floor is almost like a random design. And until then, every carpet tile had to be exactly the same, had to have the same dye, had the same way of how well the structure was. But with this random design, that didn't matter anymore. So there was less cutting waste, they didn't have as much dye, the installation time was much shorter. So there was a big success. Also, customers loved it. That helped as well, I think. So this strengthened them to ask nature again for advice. And the question they had was, how can we get rid of glue? Because carpet tiles were glued to the floor. And of course, our glues are quite toxic. And with off-gassing, it's not very healthy for us. So they asked nature again for advice. And they quickly came to the gecko because, well, as you know, they can seemingly well, they're not gluing themselves, but they have million tiny hairs that have the van der Waals forces that make them almost like magnetic on any surface. And this mechanism was translated in what they call tactiles. These are post-it note shape and form or size, well, bioplastic connectors. And when you put 4 corners of carpet tiles on them, then gravity does the rest. It becomes heavy enough to keep it on the floor. And this was great for reducing this made recycling much better. But in the meantime, they also learned another important lesson from nature, that organisms work with what is available in abundance. And what is unfortunately available in abundance are sunken fishing nets that are damaging life at the ocean floor. So now Interface is working together with fishermen from the Philippines who cannot fish on fish anymore because of overfishing regulation, but they now fish for those sunken fishing nets, making an income, cleaning the ocean floor, and Interface can use the strong nylon from the fishing nets to produce carpet tiles again. And what I find so interesting is that their existing factory that they worked with didn't want to go along with this in the beginning because the volumes were not enough. So they really said goodbye to their partner and started looking for another one that was willing, because this was the route they wanted to go into. And so this is about desensitizing your stakeholders and making choices of who is collaborating with you then. And so this is not all. The last big Apollo project that they are working on right now is to create a factory that functions like a forest. And the thinking behind this is that ecosystems are very generous. They provide us with all sorts of ecosystem services. And the question they had is, can our factories, can buildings or schools, can any built thing do the same? And together with the Biomimicry 3.8 group, they started doing just that. And the mechanism or the approach of that is to think about where the factory is now. If nothing was built there, there would be a natural, healthy, thriving ecosystem, and which is performing those ecosystem services. And the factory wants to have the same output as that natural ecosystem. It wants to do the same water or CO2 storage. It wants to support the same level of biodiversity. It wants to build the same amount of soil. So the approach here is to identify a local reference natural ecosystem, quantify the performance of that ecosystem, use that as a benchmark for the business output. So next to making carpet tiles, they will also produce the same amount of fresh air and water storage, etc. And to make that happen, then we look at the organisms in that reference ecosystem, learn from their, let's say, design strategies, and abstract them, translate them to the built environment, to the factory and its surroundings, and implement those design recommendations. So this is what Interface is working on for quite some time now. Other companies are joining them, all under the name of Project Positive. And so they apply those nature-based solutions and the performance metrics. So it's not only nature as a model, but also nature as a measure to achieve those positive impacts. And so let's go. There is a very short film on Project Positive on that. So Saskia, if I can ask you again to help me out here. So I think that is our view of how you can become regenerative. And I know I've been presenting quite some cases, a lot of information. But if there's one thing for you to remember, I think, is that biomimicry can bring this new way of viewing and valuing nature, based not on what we can extract, but what we can learn from it. And if we start doing that, both the Biomimicry Institute in the US and ourselves in the Netherlands, we do lots of workshops and trainings. We take people outdoors. And then when you start learning, if you start recognizing that you have the same sort of needs and wants as many other organisms, and you see the wonder and the beauty and the elegancy of how they come about that, then it's and you start seeing nature as a mentor, you also start getting into a different relationship. And maybe that's even more important than those beautiful innovations, because I think that if we come in the right relationship again with the rest of nature, that could be a real starting point, a pivotal starting point for us to become a welcome species and become truly regenerative and create conditions conducive to life, just as the rest of life is doing. So this is what I wanted to share with you. If you happy to take questions now, and if something comes up later on, then please send me an email. So I hope you enjoyed it so far, and let's see what people think.
Oh, thank you, Saskia. I don't know if you could hear us, but there were a good few wows and full concentration. So thank you. It feels like a gift you've given us, but thank you very, very much. Just want to make sure that someone will shout if we have questions from the chat. I've loads of questions, but I'll also ask the brilliant people with me if you've any questions that are just really dying to be expressed. I have one question that it became very clear to me, the knowledge. I've already said it, but your comprehensive understanding of the intricacies of nature. And then I was thinking of nature in terms of also the turmoil it brings. So in some of these beautiful films, in terms of nature gives, and so it does. But then I was thinking about the turmoil, and some of it I know is due to our behavior. I'm quite aware of that. But let's look at the volcanoes, for example, or heavy rainfalls that do happen and whatnot. When you look at it from the biomimicry perspective, and then bring it into some of these learnings and philosophies that you have really presented so amazingly today, I was thinking I need to ask Saskia, what can I learn from these turmoil? I need to ask you that because the avalanche, I'm sure that you've thought about it.
Well, yeah, and one thing I didn't go into today is a framework that we call the life's principles, and these are sort of generic lessons that or principles and strategies that almost all organisms apply and adhere to. And the only reason is that when I took my biomimicry master, we spent, I think 6 months on just this framework alone. So it's a bit much to address now. But that says, for instance, that life is really good at dealing or adapting to changing conditions. So turmoil or disturbance, you could see as a changing condition. It's something that you don't know when it will hit you. Like take a forest fire. You don't know when it will hit you, where it's going to be, how big it's going to be. So there's a lot of insecurity about it. The only thing is that it will at some point happen in time. Same maybe for tsunamis or, trees getting hit by lightning. And organisms, they use a couple of strategies to deal with that. So one of them is they have a whole set of diversity is really important, a variation of strategies to meet the disturbance. Most systems are decentralized and distributed, so if it hits you in this place but not somewhere else, you can still operate. And self-healing is also one of the strategies that they apply. So I think that is, if you would look at, and also our own human body is a great example of this. If you get a wound somewhere, this is a disturbance. It's a turmoil for your physical system. And luckily, we have all these platelets in our body that are protruding, and you have much more than you need. So you have the redundancy. So that's another aspect of it. Redundancy for vital functions is something that nature organizes for. A diverse, the platelets you have, there's different ones. So they're like the white blood cells, there's different ones. And they are decentralized because they are throughout your whole system. But you could also look at this from a resiliency point of view, that and this is a theoretic model, the adaptive cycle, that there is always like the pioneering species, the grasses, the mosses that can survive with just a little bit of sunlight and air, and they will change the soil, and then other plants can come in that need a bit more shade, and then it matures into a whole forest, and then you have the conservation phase. But there will always be this disturbance, like the forest fire, that is breaking the existing relationships. But then you have this open space, and then there can be time for maybe new combinations and new initiatives. What we have seen with the pandemic, a lot of existing things came to a stop, but also new stuff came about. And I think resilience is how you can maneuver through all these continuous phases, because life and nature, there's change is always there, and how to deal with that, that is something nature is really good at. For instance, those redundancy, decentralization, diversity in your vital functions. I hope I'm making myself clear.
Very clear and extremely inspirational. Any questions from you guys? There's a wonderful person in the room. No, Pernille, I don't have any questions. Who's working on creating an urban common, which is a philosophical concept of creating a different type of urban space.
Right.
So I'll pose the question that I'm thinking when I'm thinking of urban commons. Because you had this beautiful business case in terms of how actually to take the principles of biomimicry and think about it in developing your business. So as a startup, really trying to strive in, and you've met startups in your work. And as a startup, what you have to do is make the concept very succinct so that the linear model can understand it. You need to make somebody believe in it so there is a buy-in, etc. But if we were to build it on the biomimicry principles as a startup, what would your advice be in terms of take these principles with you in terms of the diversity? The life principles in terms of the diversity, the how to copy, learn from nature, or I don't know.
Well, now I regret that I didn't put the image of the life principles in the presentation. But you can, if you start Googling biomimicry plus life principles, I'm sure you can find them.
Thank you.
There is something in there. One of the other principles is also to be locally attuned and responsive. So it depends a bit on what type of, especially if it's an urban common, I think the strategies that go with that, one is to foster cooperative relationships. There is a lot to learn about from nature, how to collaborate with others, because especially I think in a commons that is very critical to make that happen. There is also something on using feedback loops for learning, for growing, and to make use of readily available energy and materials. If you want to start as a startup, in the beginning, they usually, well, now let me put it different. Our companies are mainly focused on growing, whereas in nature, and that's one of the other life's principles, it is never growing for the sake of growing. It's always the integration of development with growth, and also maybe knowing when not to grow. So you could see this as growing. Well, in an urban setting, think about is having more houses, more of the same. The infra is expensive. So I think this is, for me, this is really an important lesson also for startups to invest enough in the infrastructure so you can accommodate for growth in a later stadium. If you start growing and you lack the infrastructure, then you will come to a stop and it will be really hard to catch up again. So that is just one thing that is important for startups, I think. And if it is about commons, yeah, we think nature is full of competition, but in fact there's much more cooperation than competition, and there's lots of lessons to learn from that. One website, I can recommend two websites for you to look into. One is asknature.org. It is a taxonomy of biological functions, so you can type in a verb and all sorts of biological information will come up to help you. And the other one is synapse.net, I think, or .bio, which also has quite cool case studies and stuff that may be helpful for you as well.
Thank you so very much. That was amazing and very, very generous of you. We're going to wish you a wonderful day, Saskia, but before you leave us, we're just going to give you a huge round of applause for taking time out to be with us today. It was a real pleasure and an amazing amazing science talks. Thank you so very, very much. And we hope to see you in Blocksup when you're in Copenhagen, and we'll be happy to host you here. But thank you for taking time out with us today, and we wish you a wonderful afternoon and evening. And thank you everyone for being with us today. And we're back on the 29th of November. But for now, thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.